Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming into this update on Brexit. As you know, an extraordinary topic, slightly overshadowed by the events of the last few months. But I think it's time we started looking at this again because it's becoming quite critical. So people are starting to come in. We've got 130 people signed up. I expect we'll probably have about 50 in live, Gordon. I forgot to tell you that when we were just on the pre-record. So, you know, all that really remains for me to say is thank you again, Gordon, for leaping in to do this so quickly. Things just started to change last week. I think for me, it was the notion that Nancy Pelosi in the States had said, the law is being broken, we won't back a trade deal. And that's such a big thing. So obviously, where are we now? We're the transition until 31st of December. We need a free trade agreement by then, or what? So first of all, Gordon, how are the negotiations going?
Pretty badly, actually. I actually looked at the last announcements from both sides, and if I just quote, you get an impression of where they lie. And of course, what's kind of interesting is what the statements say from the EU Commission side in a kind of different way from what the UK government is saying. So the UK government said that a number of challenging areas remain and the divergences on some are still significant. The UK government remains committed to working hard to reach agreement by mid-October 2020. The significance of mid-October is that if there's no agreement by then in practice it's almost impossible to have something in place by 1st January, when of course in the absence of agreement we revert to no deal dealing on WTO terms. But the European Commission was actually a bit more specific, and in terms of our conversation, I think actually is more useful because it highlights where the problems lie. So the European Commission have said significant differences remain in areas of essential interest for the European Union. And then they said specifically on state aid, the UK government is refusing to include indispensable guarantees of fair competition while requesting free access to the EU market. They also say on other level playing field matters, important guarantees are still missing on non-regression from social, environmental, labour and climate standards. And then just one final quote. Again, this is the European Commission's view on things. The UK government has not engaged on other major issues. This one is lovely. They say, such as credible horizontal dispute settlement mechanisms, which only a European lawyer could come up with. It really means you have to have a court that is going to be appointed, such as a European Court of Justice, to decide what happens in the event of future disputes about the meaning of any trade agreement. And because the UK government is so determined that the European Court of Justice will no longer have any jurisdiction, they're fighting against that. But I just thought that's a wonderful expression to use. And then they talk about essential safeguards for judicial cooperation and law enforcement, fisheries, or level playing field requirements in the areas of transport and energy. And so it goes on. So there's a lot of stuff in there about very specific areas where the European Commission is saying that these are major problems, whereas the UK government is talking in more general terms about, well, there are differences, but almost suggesting that we'll get there in the end. The biggest one in all of this is what's referred to as level playing field. So the European Union is saying we expect the UK to conform with things like state aid and with environmental regulations. And the UK government is saying, well, no, we're no longer part of the European Union, therefore we can do the hell we like in these areas. You've entered an agreement with Canada, for example, without all of these protections. European Union, in response to that, says, well, you are right on our doorstep, and we don't want unfair competition on our doorstep. That's not a problem with Canada or with Japan, but it's a potential problem with the UK. So that's really a pretty fundamental dispute. By contrast, you know, they mention fisheries there. People get very worked up for some reason about fish and fishing rights. That should be relatively easy, you know, to compromise on. So the UK government at the moment is saying, we want access to European markets for British fish, but we don't want European boats, you know, Spanish and French fishing boats coming into UK waters. And the compromise almost certainly will be that some limits will be placed on European access to British waters, and in exchange for that, British fishermen will be able to sell their produce in France and Spain, go into their ports. So that, you know, you imagine that's just about negotiating positions, but it can be solved. Whereas that's why I'm suggesting that this whole thing about level playing field for keen Brexiteers, it's more of a fundamental issue, and maybe it's about last minute negotiations. You know, it may be that these hard positions suddenly, sometime around the 15th of October, will be softened a little bit and compromise will be reached. But, you know, that's how I would sum it up at the moment. It's pretty strong differences are emerging.
It's extraordinary to me how, you know, there are really important issues at stake here, like state subsidy, like level playing field, and yet the press and, you know, want to focus on fishing, which, you know, yes, that's an important point, but it's a very, very small part of the economies of the EU and the UK. But for some reason, it's one of those rallying cries, right? It's bizarre.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, picking up your point about Nancy Pelosi and what the Americans are saying. Yeah, so the UK government has introduced legislation called the Internal Market Bill, and they put into this legislation the right of the UK government to amend the terms of withdrawal agreement in terms of how customs regulations will work between the UK and Northern Ireland. And you'll recall, of course, that the reason there was a customs border put in the Irish Sea between Britain and Northern Ireland was to avoid a border within the country of Ireland between Ireland and Northern Ireland for all the good reasons about you know, past conflicts and avoiding the idea of customs borders in Ireland, which could trigger new problems. So the UK finally agreed to this border, as it were, in the Irish Sea. And the UK's position is now, well, we're concerned that the European Commission will try to enforce the regulations in too harsh a way. Therefore, we want to reserve the right to not implement all of these things. But of course, the problem is that Britain is then breaching an international agreement. It's breaching international law. And of course, the European Commission is furious about this. I think every former living UK Prime Minister has objected to it, so it's pretty strong stuff. Yeah. And now, as you mentioned, the Americans and Joe Biden most recently has said, we're very concerned about what the UK is doing. We're concerned about what may happen in Ireland. And if this continues, it will damage the prospects of a UK United States free trade agreement in future. So it's all rather messy, it has to be said. And not least, it damages the UK's reputation generally in terms of a country that upholds the rule of law. So yeah, that just sort of added a bit of heat to already a very hot topic, and something that is really quite messy at the moment.
And I mean, in your experience, I mean, I studied law, and you know, that was one of the great things about studying administrative law, particularly, was that the UK has always had rule of law at the centre of its legislative processes. Have you ever seen anything like that happen before?
No, I haven't. And you know, several senior law officers in the UK have resigned over this issue. Um, it is absolutely unique. I guess if I was trying to work out why the UK government has taken this step, other than, you know, a cavalier disregard for law, would be to say it's something that we need to hold in reserve. We appreciate we're doing something that technically is illegal, but the consequences if we don't do anything and the European Commission acts in what we regard as an unreasonable way would be very damaging to the UK. So it's a kind of the alternative is worse kind of argument, but yeah, it's certainly something that I mean, it almost suggests that the UK government entered the withdrawal agreement without fully working out the consequences of it, and they're now saying, oh well, if the European Union acts on the withdrawal agreement in a way we don't like, we'll not, it won't apply to us. And you know, it's a bit like if a client comes to me, a relocation company has entered a contract with a client, and realizes later there are clauses in the contract that make life difficult. You know, I'm not going to say to them, oh, well, don't worry, just breach the contract. You know, it's everything has consequences. Yeah, it's at the very least, this is an uncomfortable moment for the UK in this.
It's just, I mean, I'm not going to get political about it, but the hypocrisy of saying, you know, oh yes, the government can breach the law in a very specific and limited way, and then 2 days later say pubs need to close at 10 o'clock and you can't meet with more than 6 people. It's like, well, in a very specific and limited way, maybe I'll meet with 8 people and I'll leave the pub at 10:30. I mean, it just, you know, it sends an extraordinary message.
It does. Yeah, there's no getting away from that. You're absolutely right. And for a government minister to say we're yeah, as you quote, we're only breaking the law in a very specific and limited way is not a good message.
So, coming on to the nitty gritty, which I know, you know, most of our delegates are wanting to hear about, how is this going to affect relocation services from the 1st of January?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there is still time for a deal to be entered into, for there to be a free trade agreement, but we don't know what that might be, what that might look like. I mean, my own view at the moment would be that there is a possibility of an agreement, but it would be almost like in skeletal form. It would be an outline agreement that maybe dealt with 1 or 2 critical issues, and then negotiations would continue into next year on fleshing that out. So, you know, anything we can discuss just now is almost based on what if there is a no deal, and what are the consequences.
Yeah.
So, you know, the one I've been dealing with a lot recently, of course, is the whole issue of data protection and data transfers.
Always
the UK has adopted the GDPR, and so at face value, you say, well, that's fine, things continue as before. And that's true in terms of transferring data from the UK to the European Union. The problem ahead of us is from 1st January, data transfers from the European Union to the UK will be affected if there is no deal. So, we have obviously multiple situations where you have a UK-based relocation management company being provided with services by an EU-based DSP, for example. So the instructions go from the UK, the European Union member, all the personal data, and then reporting comes back to the RMC in the UK. Now, the difficulty is that in the absence of a trade deal that includes data transfers, the European Union would need to give adequacy clearing to the UK. And they do that with a number of countries where basically the European Commission is saying, we regard your data protection laws as equivalent to Europe's, therefore data transfers can be made from the European Union to that country and no further formalities are required. It's just as if it was transferred from France to Germany. So the UK would hope to get an adequacy ruling from the European Commission before 31st December. If they get that, then fine. But the difficulty is with this recent court case where the Privacy Shield was declared as invalid, the basis for that was the European Court of Justice really saying United States security services, the FBI, for example, have access to personal data in ways that we don't like.
Right.
Therefore, even although individual companies in the United States might be complying with EU law on data protection, the security services can still override that. Now, if that's such a big issue with European Court of Justice, then they may say exactly the same with the UK. And we just don't know. They may say, well, we want a deal to be done which clarifies exactly how police forces in the UK and MI5 and MI6 want access to data. We need more information on this. In the past, it didn't matter. But going forward, if they take the approach they did on the Privacy Shield, at the very least, it could delay things and possibly be another area of conflict where the UK government's view would be you're interfering in internal UK affairs. We want our police to have these powers, even although they may differ from the powers that exist in France or Germany or the Netherlands. So that's suddenly become a bit trickier. And if Britain doesn't get this adequacy clearing, then it would mean that all contracts between UK-based relocation management companies, and I'm including all the American ones who have, their European headquarters effectively in the UK, they would have to amend all their contracts with their suppliers, with their clients, to allow for data transfers to be done into the UK on what are called the standard contract clauses. And these are built into all the contracts, and then everything is fine in theory. We have these contract clauses, therefore that allows us to transfer the data. But the sheer admin involved in that, the hassle, sending out all these contracts all over Europe, nobody wants to see that. So, so that is one to watch out for. I hope I'm describing a worse scenario, and that just almost common sense will demand that people in power reach agreement on that. But we saw what happened with the United States. Therefore, we can't assume that will be solved easily. So that's the big one on data protection. One that I just came across the other day that really hadn't occurred to me before, it was reported that some of the major UK banks, including Lloyds and Barclays, have started writing to their customers who happen to be resident in mainland Europe to say, we are closing your bank facilities, including your credit cards, by 31st December. And of course, people are kind of outraged about this, but the reason for it is that several of the UK headquartered banks will now have to have individual banking licenses in order to operate in each of the 27 EU member states. And they're taking a view that, oh, well, we might apply for a banking license in Germany, we might apply for one in France, etc. But we ain't going to do this in all 27 member states. I mean, it's quite a complicated procedure to go through. And the reason they have to do this is that as things stand at the moment, on the 31st of December, what we call passporting rights will disappear for UK banks. Passporting rights simply mean that if you are based in one EU member state, you can provide banking facilities right across the EU. You don't have to apply for licenses in each country. That disappears on the 31st of December. The banks are not getting any comfort from the UK government that they will be able to do a deal on passporting continuing. Therefore, they're having to take their own actions, which is depriving thousands, hundreds of thousands of people potentially of their credit cards and bank accounts. So it's one that just wouldn't have occurred to me. I mean, I knew about passporting, but I thought of it in terms of big banks and commercial deals and things. But this is the average person, the average expat who still finds it convenient to have a UK bank account.
Sure. That is, I mean, that's extraordinary. And I mean, that's one of those things that's coming right down into the nitty-gritty of our industry and the individuals who are being affected by stuff like this. But I mean, just extraordinary. And so is there any way around that? I mean, I know passporting was a big issue when all of the deal was being debated last year. Is there any way around this?
I mean, the best hope is that as part of the free trade agreement, it's agreed to continue passporting rights.
Quite unlikely though, isn't it?
But, you know, obviously related to what I'm saying about the state of negotiations currently, you just have to hope that is agreed. But otherwise, well, I did notice, I think it was Lloyd's has actually said that they've now identified the specific countries where they will be closing accounts.
Right.
And they've mentioned the Netherlands, Slovakia, Germany, Ireland, Italy, and Portugal. So it means that, for example, if you have an account in France, Lloyd's, I guess, are applying for a French banking license, this would suggest. And that means that if you're in France, you can use Lloyd's. So, and maybe HSBC will take a decision that as a global bank, they will apply for licenses in each of these 27 countries. So there may be options to just switch to a different bank.
It just seems, so. I mean, I was on a session last week with Lynn Shotwell at WLC and Steve Grine, and they were saying, our banking systems in the US, in North America, are not as sophisticated as yours in Europe. Well, it looks like ours are going the same way. I mean, given that we just take banking as a global thing and we move our money wherever we want, that's quite a revelation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to sort of be delivering scare stories here, but that is a live one just now, because people are now starting to receive these letters, which is, to say, resulted in a bit of outrage. And how did this happen?
Yeah, where have we gone now? I wanted to ask you, this is something we've discussed many times over these Brexit webinars over the last couple of years, but we've talked about the directions of business relocation out of the UK. Do you have any predictions?
Yeah, I mean, the last time I was looking at the stats, it was showing there was a bit of travel out of the UK in terms of jobs moving mainly in the financial sector,
Yeah.
a little bit in the pharmaceuticals, and the countries receiving that business, or locations rather, Dublin, which has the advantage of English speaking and obviously has the IT companies there already. Frankfurt for its banking infrastructure. Paris, I think, gains quite a lot because of its size, and you know, as being able to say, being similar to London. And Amsterdam was the other one that seems to be doing quite well. Now, I suspect there's been a bit of a COVID-19 effect in that it's slowing down. Obviously, everyone is rethinking the use of offices and where people will be based. And at the very least, I think that has slowed down that kind of, I would describe it as more of a trickle that has never really turned into vast numbers. But as we go into next year with the end of the transition period, it will be the sectors I would be watching would be like the car industry, where, and again, if there's no deal, I can't imagine in the long term car manufacturers who rely on just-in-time European supply chains, of which the UK is just a part. The danger of these manufacturers saying, well, we have invested up till now in Sunderland in the northeast of England, but our next investment will be in Poland, or you know, in the EU. Why have different tariffs to pay, well, any tariffs to pay, and just regulations and paperwork getting in the way of that free flow? So I think that is something we will have to watch out for. But yeah, the way it interacts with COVID-19 at the moment is kind of interesting too. But I think for the moment that is just slowed down a lot of planning that would otherwise have been taking place.
That's right now. So moving on then to immigration, I know that, I mean, I had an email from one of our members, which we'll come on to in a minute, asking questions about immigration, because that's huge. What's the state of play at the moment? Are we anywhere different to where we were talking about a no deal?
Yeah, in some ways, because immigration was in the withdrawal agreement, you know, in terms of protecting rights of UK citizens in the European Union and European citizens in the UK, then we have clarity around that. And, you know, basically rights are protected subject to local registration requirements. So, for example, if you're an EU citizen in the UK, I think you have until 30th of June next year.
Oh, okay.
Even after we're finished with the transition period, it was recognized that, you know, there would be potentially hundreds of thousands of people having to register, and therefore there's an extended period allowing for that. And basically you apply for settled status if you've been in the UK for 5 years. If it's less than 5 years, you're still protected, and you apply for pre-settled status, and that takes you through until you can apply after 5 years for full settled status. So that is fine. The difficulties will arise, and in fact, you shared that question that had arisen from a EuRA member in Germany.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's a question that there are a lot of variants on that. And it's this more practical matter of what we call A1 certificates. And this is where you have somebody going on assignment for, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, in this case from UK to Germany. We have a system to avoid double payment of Social Security payments. So rather than having to pay in the UK and pay in Germany, the idea is you just continue to pay in the UK, you go over to Germany, and you have a certificate which states that, yes, these payments are being made in the UK, and therefore it gives you your status and proves that you're not avoiding tax or social security payments. And that's an EU-wide system. It works pretty well, and people understand it. And of course, unless it's renewed or some new version of it comes into place, then as from 1st January, there is no equivalent system. You know, UK is now outside that system. And worst scenario is it means that employers could have two sets of payments to make. You know, you're continuing to pay in the UK system, but this employee is out in Germany, therefore they're having to pay in Germany as well, because you no longer have this certificate to show that it's not necessary to make the payments. Now, in the absence of this being in the new agreement, then it's only once the UK starts entering reciprocal arrangements with individual states that you then avoid that problem of double taxation. So it is a practical problem. I did check this morning with the UK government websites in this area. And it's interesting, a number of the pages that explain how the system works have now notices saying page withdrawn, because they clearly are waiting to insert new pages once agreement is reached, or there's clarity on what happens going forward. So for EuRA members who are saying, how the heck do we advise our clients, or are trying to budget for next year, what will the costs be? The answer is, unfortunately, this falls into this void just now where we don't yet have new agreements, and it's quite possible that we won't have new agreements for some time because they may have to be negotiated individually. It's almost falling back to the kind of situation before the UK was a member of the European Union, and the kinds of agreements we have with other countries. We have double taxation agreements with countries around the world, but it obviously takes time for these to be put in place, and it would seem a real pity if it wasn't just an agreement with the EU that covered this generally. But yeah, I mean, and it may be that there are some immigration specialists listening to this who'll be able to add, a better commentary on the detail of maybe heard things coming out of the UK Home Office on what will happen. But that's the official line just now.
Well, just to say that next week on Wednesday, as part of the EuRA Full Forum, there will be a mini immigration symposium, and I know that Brexit is on the list of things to be discussed. But just to go to Anita, sorry, this is a question from Anita Alexieva from Wissenpoint in Germany. She was saying, as we're getting more and more questions on how Brexit will affect the short-term business travellers and commuters, and whether they will need special permits coming from the UK to Germany on short-term under 90-day visas, will UK authorities issue A1 certificates, posted worker declarations, or will they need visas? So more generally about how travel is going to be impacted and business travel, how do you see this?
Yeah, so firstly, if I start at the immigration level first,
yeah.
What's really happening from 1st January, if you're looking at this from a UK perspective, EU countries and citizens of EU countries no longer have any different status from somebody coming into the UK or applying to come to the UK from Japan, United States, India, etc. So, and the same will apply, though it is on a country-by-country basis. Whatever the German immigration rules are, they will now apply to the UK. Unless again it was a special arrangement between the UK and Germany. Now, if we come down to the level of business travel, it really depends on the purpose of the visit. So the idea is that for UK citizens going to EU countries and vice versa, you can spend up to 90 days in any 180-day period. But that's not intended for working purposes. So that it would allow me to attend a conference, for example, but if I was doing any business, yeah, conferences are not effective.
That's good.
But, any business that I was doing there, if I stepped into my Paris office and sent some emails, then technically I need a visa for that. And similarly, study visas if I was attending a university. So there some things are covered by the withdrawal agreement. Business travel generally looks okay, but it has left a lot of gaps still to be filled. And in fact, I remember when we were talking, I think it was probably back in February, just when we'd become, when we left the EU, and the kinds of headings I mentioned then, I don't think any of them have we any more clarity on. And you know, it's my ability to take my dog to France.
Yeah.
You know, the pet passport scheme disappears. So what will replace that? What kind of things are needed there? But you know, more seriously for most people are things like insurance, you know, health insurance and health coverage. What do I now need to put in place for that? Because we lose our EU rights. Driving licenses, you know, at what stage will I now need an international permit to drive? So there will be a lot of areas where I think, particularly from a UK perspective, between now and the end of the year, we hope to get a lot more clarity around what we have to do when we're traveling in Europe. And potentially 27 different sets of rules have to be complied with. So a little bit messy in that area, and frankly, not much progress on where we were in February. And again, it's because it's all wrapped up in this bigger picture of can we achieve this sort of big umbrella free trade agreement that would then make it easier to fit all these pieces in. And of course, the idea of a big agreement being agreed between now and the end of the year looks unlikely. So this you get the feeling this could continue for some time.
And I mean, for corporations, this is a compliance nightmare, because when you get into the kind of nuances of what is business travel, what is not business travel, do you need a visa to go somewhere for business? I mean, just for ourselves, when we have run conferences outside of the EU, in Vietnam, in India, you know, you've got to be really careful that, you know, luckily we have, you know, our access to our fantastic member network who will make sure that you do have the right visa for running a conference, that you're not going in on a tourist visa, that you're, you know, that it's defined as business travel. Because, you know, with companies being so careful about things like immigration compliance, that's a huge deal.
Yeah, and I think particularly because we have obviously become accustomed to the fact that we just don't need to think about these things in the European context. And suddenly we do. So yeah, I think a step back is going to be needed as we look against, you know, each of these categories that we've been discussing, and between now and the end of the year, really getting clarity around what we need to do. So I guess we're setting this up very nicely for another webinar.
I think it's pretty essential. By the end of October, we'll be needing to talk about this again for sure. But so thinking about the wider impact of the future of the United Kingdom, this is a matter of huge debate. I mean, obviously, 6 years ago, I think we had the first referendum for Scottish independence. You are based in Edinburgh, and you're very, you know, tied into the politics of this. What are we looking at here?
Well, firstly, I'd say I think the Irish situation is the more problematic at the just in terms of the immediate term, and we see that. I mean, after all, that's why Britain is proposing to breach international law.
Yeah.
And if I were in Northern Ireland, and perhaps traditionally I had unionist leanings, I was happy to be part of Britain. The complications and almost the absurdity of what has happened as a result of Brexit, the fact that everyone agrees there should be no border in Ireland, but as a result of that, Northern Ireland is being slightly detached from the UK for customs regulations, etc. You know, logic would be screaming, why don't we just have a united Ireland now? You know, why are we holding back on this? And I think there will be stronger views and shifting views in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, around this issue. So the pressure, I think, for something that's going to work better, which looks to me like a united Ireland and Northern Ireland potentially leaving the UK, I think that discussion is going to become a far more active discussion. I appreciate there'll be EuRA members in Northern Ireland who are probably screaming at me at this moment. But in sheer logical terms, I get why that pressure will be increasing. And it will be difficult for the UK government to resist, because they've always said that they would respect the will of the majority in Northern Ireland. And the majority in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the European Union. So kind of like Scotland.
Just like Scotland.
Dragged out of the European Union against the wishes of the majority. The Scottish one is more complicated, but I think one of the big factors has been, as a result of Brexit, where, as I mentioned, Scotland had voted to stay in, there now has been a move, a stronger support for Scottish independence. And you know, it's been consistent now for a few months, a small but persistent majority in favour of independence. And it's really almost down to the people who were against independence but strongly pro-Europe have now switched side, because the only way of Scotland remaining in Europe, in the EU, is to be independent. So the chances of a Scottish referendum, I would say, within the next 2 years have increased substantially. But the contradiction then becomes, we have a border between Scotland and England, which is, for the first time in 300 years, an actual political and economic border, because it becomes the border between the European Union and England. And, you know, the idea of that is, well, it just would appall many of us, but we seem to be on a route moving in that direction. So, so the consequences for the UK and what we see as the UK state today are really quite troubling. And I think we will, particularly if there's a no deal, you know, that the voices who are saying the current UK government has messed things up so badly, we're affected economically, we're being separated from these countries we felt close to. I think it is quite troubling for the UK.
Yes, it's very sad. It's an extraordinary thing to contemplate. So just to say to everyone who's attending, all our delegates, we do have time for some Q&A, and you can do that in two ways. You can either, if you just hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A tab, and you'll see the chat tab. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make, you can do it in either the Q&A, which I've got open over there, or in the chat tab. So please do go right ahead if you've got something you want to say. In the meantime, Gordon, I wanted to just go back to, you were talking about Privacy Shield and how, you know, that's going to affect data transfers. Just wanted to remind everybody that we did a briefing about Privacy Shield about a month ago. So that is still up to date and on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I had hoped that by now there would have been some further announcement from the, well, at our end, the European Data Protection Board, or the Department of Commerce in the United States. We were advised that there were high-level talks taking place with a view to trying to come up with some kind of government-level solution. Now, whether these talks have just got bogged down and have been unproductive, or whether it's just the slow pace that these things go at, I don't know. But I guess, particularly if I were advising a relocation management company just now, it's beginning to look as if they may have to go ahead and put these, amend all their contracts and put these standard contract clauses in place to comply with the law. No grace period has been allowed. So strictly speaking, since that judgment last month, if you're transferring data under the Privacy Shield, you're using an invalid mechanism. I can't believe for a moment anyone would be fined or prosecuted, for that in the short term. But I think we're getting to the stage now where it would be important to be able to say, well, yeah, we are updating our contracts. We're in the process of doing that. And at the very least, identifying all the contracts, potentially hundreds, potentially thousands, that will have to be updated. So it seems such a, admin burden and a, waste of effort if suddenly there is an announcement that, there is issue too, but I think that's how things stand at the moment.
It just reminds me of my first job. I was with BP rewriting contracts of employment because after I finished my degree, because somebody had successfully sued them for not being able to smoke at their desk anymore, and every single contract had to be in. I have a very interesting question in the chat box from an anonymous attendee who obviously knows a bit about EuRA. And the question is, should EuRA be worried about having a bank account in Belgium?
So the EuRA's bank account just now is where?
There's the KBC. It's in a Belgian bank in Belgium and in the UK as well.
Okay.
Two separate accounts. Two separate accounts.
And the bank is a UK bank or a
Belgian bank?
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. The problem would be for the Belgian bank, if they already have, they may have to apply for a UK banking license. But you would imagine that most of the major banks, because London is such a financial center, if you were applying for one extra license, it would be in the UK. The problem is far more for UK banks because they're having to look at 27 different countries. So your Belgian bank would be notifying you about now if they were withdrawing any facilities. But I think you should be pretty comfortable about that.
Same anonymous attendee, I'm figuring out who it is now, has said that the primary bank account is actually held in Edinburgh. So if
that's a good place.
Well, unless Scotland leaves the UK,
we'll be back in the European Union soon.
We'll just move to Scotland. Thank you, Johanna. What do we advise our UK assignees with bank accounts in Sweden to do?
So they should again be notified by their own bank. So firstly, their own bank may decide that they're obtaining a Swedish banking license, in which case there's no problem. If they are going to withdraw facilities, then they should be notifying, they obviously have to notify their customers very soon, which is why these letters are now going out. As far as I'm aware, the only 3 banks so far that are doing this are Lloyds, Barclays, and Coutts & Co.
Oh, right.
Coutts is a private bank for the very wealthy, so that would be your senior expats.
Yeah, certainly would. Fascinating. Thank you very much. I think there's just so much uncertainty that obviously we will reconvene at the end of October. And you're pretty certain that if by the end of October something isn't on the table, we are heading to a no deal, just because the time doesn't allow it to be negotiated.
That's what both the UK government and the European Commission is saying at the moment. We know the nature of these things is we may reach the end of October and they'll be saying, well, you know, unless we have something done by the first week of November, then it's, and that's when they do a deal. So that there is a bit of history around European negotiations that suggests there's always the possibility of a last minute deal, which tends to be about 7 to 10 days after the final deadline has expired. So, yeah.
And in your view, because I know that you follow politics on a UK basis and in the EU, in your view, is a political solution likely, or are the politics overriding the good of a deal?
You know, the pressure there must be on the UK government from car manufacturers, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
And that applies to the or let's say to the German government as well, from car manufacturers in Germany. Big employers. So I would imagine that there will be huge pressure to reach a compromise. What has surprised me is the kind of language being used at the moment, which almost suggests, and certainly from a UK perspective, that there are points of principle there and we are not prepared to negotiate on these points of principle, whatever the consequences. And I mean, I think the no deal preparations were being ramped up again 2 or 3 weeks ago. We heard of more preparations being made, and I'm sure the same is going on in the EU just now. It's pretty dispiriting, and I think certainly from a UK perspective, I do feel let down by our politicians. If either this is a wonderful negotiating tactic and we'll pat them on the back for some kind of amazing deal, or they are letting us down badly. But so the jury is out. When we speak in November, we'll know whether it's madness or brilliance.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm afraid it's probably more likely to be madness. Fascinating stuff. There's a final question. Will it be enough for an assignee to change the address on their UK bank account to a UK address from an EU address? Would that be, no, it wouldn't, would it? Wouldn't make a difference.
Well, I suppose if somebody is going between the UK and the EU, and it just so happens they had the account and gave their EU address, but they have the ability also to operate from a UK address, yeah. But of course, they would need to go back to Barclays and, you know, in response to this letter they received and say, oh, well, just please reassign it to my UK address. So there may be cases like that, but clearly for a lot of people that won't be an option.
I mean, what we'll do is, you know, you are fantastic at keeping tabs on all of this, and you know, these are the things which are definitely the pinch points for the relocation companies for all our members. So, you know, from that point of view, from the immigration point of view, I know that we'll keep you all fully up to date with that. Gordon, just remains for me to say thank you so much. Just to let everybody know, we're changing the systems with these briefings. These are now going to become members only. So I will be sending you, or my colleague Marie will be sending you the link to this, which will be on YouTube, but it will be unlisted. So it'll only be available to EuRA members, and they will be on the EuRA website. But we'll send you the direct link to the recording as soon as it's up, but just to let you know there's a slight change. Gordon, we will reconvene at the beginning of November and see where we are then. Let's hope that in all sorts of different ways we are in a better place, both in terms of Brexit and in terms of COVID, and maybe being able to go to the pub after 10 o'clock at night. So we will see. But in the meantime, Gordon, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
To everybody who attended today, thank you so much for coming in. We will keep these sessions going, and we'll make sure that, you know, we're up to date as much as we can be. So next week, for those of you who are signed up for Seville next year, there's the EuRA Forum. That's all taking place through the EuRA app. You will all be sent your logins for that over the next couple of days. Most people should have had them, but a few people will be receiving those. So there's lots of fascinating sessions coming up, and a full program is on the EuRA website. So have a go. Thank you to everybody who's sending really nice comments in, Gordon. Thank you, Gordon, Dom, great session. That's from Orsa. Thank you from Sylvia. Eleanor, thank you, Gordon and Dominic. Looking forward to the next session. Thank you, Daniel de Groot. Thank you for organising these sessions. It's really kind of you all. We are delighted to do it. And Gordon, thank you again for your continued brilliant support and brilliant insights. Thanks, everybody. And we'll do what we do now. This is the traditional Zoom wave. Goodbye. See you soon. Bye, everybody. Take care.